within the deep life, there are a lot of terms that we throw out. Awareness, frequency, vibration, consciousness, even energy.
Yeah.
And up until recently, when we were having a conversation with someone and we began talking about raising our consciousness and raising the consciousness about our planet, did we understand that he didn't understand what that meant, and he didn't fully grasp what consciousness is and how important it is within this lifetime, in this 3D reality that we're living, the universe, everything is made up of consciousness. And similarly, about maybe 3 years ago, I didn't know it either.
Right.
And still to this day, my understanding of consciousness grows and evolves.
Yeah.
It becomes deeper the more I grow in consciousness and awareness. So let's get into what consciousness is, what it means, what awareness is, how that ties into our frequency and vibration and energy, all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
And what we're going to talk about here too is what we've learned from others and other teachers, like people who really can eloquently talk about it and describe it. And this is how we interpret it, and what is also going to continue throughout this podcast. Like, we're not going to stop talking about it. It is something that's probably going to come in every episode. So we want to make sure you guys have an understanding when we begin using these words, the terminology, and the language, how it affects us and everyone and everything around us.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. Well, to do our best to cover a lot in a short amount of time and do this kind of like a semi deep dive on consciousness. Because I think this is consciousness as kind of we understand it and what we are referring to when we talk about maybe raising consciousness or evolving in consciousness. And I love what you said there, that it's like, it's always changing, because that's really like the point. It's like, as our awareness, which is, I use awareness and consciousness interchangeably, as our consciousness is growing, our awareness is growing. So the way that we see things is changing and everything is evolving. So hopefully we can go through this and that will make more sense as we do. I was just starting off. It's like the basis of understanding this is to recognize that everything is energy. Everything that we've ever seen, heard, experienced, felt, it's all just energy.
Energy, yes.
And energy vibrates. And the speed at which something vibrates is its frequency. So that's another, like, going back to it, like we talk about, like, we use energy, vibe, like you can say like, oh, like somebody's got really good vibes, or someone's got really good energy, or like somebody's got really good frequency. It all kind of means the same thing. It's like when it's used in that sense, it's referring to the same thing. And when it's used like scientifically, I'm sure there's nuance to the terms that maybe I don't know the difference in how like a scientist would define frequency versus vibration, but I understand that the faster something vibrates, the higher its frequency, and that changes its expression. And I think that's all we really need to grasp for this. So everything sort of has its own frequency signature, and those fit along a spectrum. So we have like this electromagnetic spectrum. It's basically a spectrum of all energy. So like I said, like electricity is on that spectrum, magnetism is on that spectrum, radio and X-ray and light. So you have, like, everyone knows the light spectrum, where you see light hitting like a prism and it splinters off into the rainbow. The rainbow is the spectrum of energy in the part that is manifesting as light. And the light that we can see is that, like Roy G. Biv, the red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, violet, to like a white. You can kind of see like a white light, and that's incorporating all of it, and you see it as light. The absence of color is darkness, but darkness isn't a color. it's the absence, which is important because it's the absence of that energy. So like there's less consciousness in darkness, at least from a light
Standpoint.
standpoint. I'm not sure, because there's other things like radio and X-ray waves and all these other frequencies that we can't see, and there's light levels and frequencies on the spectrum that we can't see. So our eyes only see a little bit, our ears only have a small part of the whole spectrum of sound, but that comes into it. The atomic table of elements, each element is differentiated by its consciousness, the energy of it. And so they all have different properties. They all have different weights, and they all have different physical looks, because consciousness is the energy, and then it's like splinters off into all different aspects, and they all manifest differently. So in the same way that we're talking about light is also physical, different crystals and different minerals are going to look different, but they all look the same. Like every piece of copper looks the same, but copper doesn't look like iron. It's a different weight, it's a different color, it's a different texture, and that is all different manifestations of the energy. So another way of thinking of energy is information. In formation, it's the specific look.
Excuse me.
God bless you. So if we think of all energy as information, and so the specific frequency signature of the energy is going to be how that forms in the manifest world, and in what we call like 3D reality, and like the world that we see and experience. That makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense
Good.
to me. Yes. I liked the example that you used with a person, like, when someone has a good vibe.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So
or good vibes only.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the positive. You feel there's an uplifting energy. It's like you want to be around it. It's energetic. It's like it's almost like light and fun. And then you also get the other end when it's like a dark, heavy energy from someone. It's more somber. It's like heavy. You can tell, but you can't see it. You literally cannot see it, but you feel it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that is a lot of, and I want to kind of come back to sort of like the human aspect of consciousness, but a lot of it is that sort of the feeling that we pick up when we're in somebody's aura, when we're feeling their frequency, and different frequencies react to other frequencies, and sometimes they can be in harmony and resonate and build a stronger frequency, and other times they're not resonant, and it becomes like static. Radio is a good example of tuning into different frequencies, and sometimes there's like static because there's not a good clear signal coming through, because the frequencies aren't in alignment. But when they are in alignment, there's a clear signal. And that's a really good example of how consciousness and or energy is coming in and informing the manifest reality. Where if you take a radio, like you turn the dial on a radio, I know this might go over some people's heads if they've never used a real radio. But they're all like on a radio. I think everybody can at least remember seeing a radio at some point, where you turn the dial and the little thing goes across and you change to different radio stations. That station is a specific frequency.
So it's also the TV channels.
TV channels are the same way. Yeah, same idea. But not if it's digital.
True.
But it's the same. The concept is there. So even with TV, whether digital or not, all those channels are in the air. So radio stations, I like this analogy, like every radio station is playing in your room at the same time. But you turn the dial and pick which one you're going to align with. So when the radio is set to a certain frequency, that frequency comes in and plays through the radio and expresses through the radio. That's important. That will be important as we get to humans and how consciousness how humans can evolve and grow their consciousness. Here's another example of how this works, which I think will be really helpful with water. Where if we think of water as just these elements, it's
Okay,
yeah.
let me just stop you there, because I think any skeptics out there or me
Okay.
3 years ago would have been really confused with water having consciousness or awareness. Like, wait a minute, how can you describe
That's a
that?
great point.
Like consciousness is mind, like it's tied to mind. That's what I always thought.
Yeah. Okay. So let's back up a little bit. I love that. So I think there's a lot of confusion around what is consciousness, because I think a lot of scientists aren't in agreement over what classifies or qualifies as consciousness. And there is sort of like the argument of like, does there need to be life in order for there to be consciousness?
Right.
How do you measure life? Does it have to be life in the terms that we recognize it? Like, so I think a lot of it is sort of like, well, a rock can't be conscious because a rock doesn't express life in the same way a human does,
Right.
or any what we call like animals. So we don't know, or like plants are alive, but they don't have consciousness because they're not like moving and interacting, which we also know to be false. It's these ideas move really slowly.
Yes.
In the scientific community, we also have in the medical, where they talk about like consciousness of being like alertness, of like, oh, they lost consciousness. Or right. Oh, the patient regained consciousness.
It gets confusing.
It gets really confusing, but it's interesting to take that, like somebody who's in who's unconscious or like in a coma, they're still alive, but their consciousness, like the aspect of them that is like them, the I, might not be there, might be off somewhere else, similar to when we go to sleep at night. We temporarily like lose consciousness, but we've all had the experience of being in a dream. Yeah. And experiencing a dream and knowing that your consciousness is in another world, experiencing a whole other life. So there's a lot of like, there's so much like nuance, and just like we could talk about this for days.
Of course, yeah. And I just wanted to bring it up because I thought this way until we listened to The Secret Life of Plants, which is an incredible book. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Plants are aware. They can hear. They can, like, they're intelligent. Like they need to be. There is a consciousness there. Nassim Harriman and like Dr. Bruce Lipton and Dr. Joe Dispenza, like all these people talk about consciousness and what like that means and how it informs life. I think it's really been pioneered through the quantum physics scientific realm.
Yeah, a lot there and a lot through epigenetics. And like you said, Bruce Lipton is huge.
Yeah, because we're also like, what makes me so excited to have this conversation is that we've been so much put into camps, like the scientific camp and then the spiritual camp. You're woo-woo and this is correct. It's like they're beginning to merge. Like the terminology is kind of like nuanced and there's gray areas, but like the scientific community, especially quantum physics and what they're discovering, is like now going to the ancient civilizations and spirit, like, oh, I get what they were saying. We can now prove it scientifically.
It's like science is finally catching up to what ancient cultures have been saying for thousands of years.
And I get so excited about it.
And I think for a long time, a lot of people, we get hung up sometimes when we think that no evidence of something being true is equal to evidence of something not being true. And I think that's a lot of the hang up in the scientific community, is like, well, we can't prove what consciousness is, when consciousness comes into the picture, when it's not. So therefore, we're going to ignore that and we're going to focus on chemicals and we're going to focus on things that we can quantify and measure. And now it's like, as the tools get better and the awareness grows, and honestly, as the consciousness on the planet evolves, the awareness grows to start to recognize that, oh, okay, so this thing like science and this thing, religion or spirituality, are actually saying the same thing, just using different language. And it's all coming together in a way that's really, really cool. We mentioned Bruce Lipton there. And
Well, do you want to get back to the water?
I'll come back to that after. Because you mentioned Bruce Lipton, and I think he was really, really important in this sort of understanding of consciousness, because he basically, I say basically because I don't necessarily know the scientific what qualifies as what and what's proof and what's not proof, but he, from my understanding, proved that like genetic determinism was wrong. And we have this idea of like your genes equal what your life is going to be. And he realized that when you break it down to specific one, like single cell organisms, they are able to respond to their environment and change. And the ability of a cell to respond to its environment is consciousness. So if you have a single cell organism, its consciousness is limited by the size of the membrane of the cell. And that cell will get bigger to a point where a cell can't get any bigger, and then it's stuck in its consciousness. So we're talking about like the evolution of consciousness. That consciousness can no longer evolve. So the cells need to merge together and form a new organism. So you'll have two cells come together, they merge, and they have a larger surface area. So they have more awareness, basically. They have more ability to react to and respond to their environment. Then the same thing happens. This thing can't get any bigger, so it merges with more. And then you get groups of cells, and you get these really like kind of primitive species that are higher in consciousness than like an amoeba or like any single celled organism. And over time, those develop into more and more complex organisms that have more and more consciousness. So then you look at like a human or any other animal, like a human, you have different groups of organisms. You have like all these liver cells that make up a liver, and that liver becomes its own entity, but it's a part of a bigger thing. So you have your systems. You have like the nervous system, which is one organism basically, and then you have the lungs and the respiratory system, the blood and the lymph systems, and you have all these systems. All these systems in our body, which are single cells, which are conscious beings that form together to make a bigger, more complex, higher consciousness being, that are all formed together. All these systems then make up the human body, which is a collection of systems that merge together in order to have higher consciousness and be able to better respond to their environment and to like experience the world from a different vantage point of higher awareness. And that's how consciousness evolves. But that like everything in the universe is also fractal. So everything is playing out on every level, as big as it gets and as small as it gets. So the smallest single organism is evolving in consciousness at the same time that the entire everything in existence is evolving in consciousness. And that's where like we talk about like the Big Bang. So you have everything in one singularity. So like, and this is like sort of like the prevailing theory in science. I don't know how true it is or not, but you start with everything that exists in a singularity the size of a pea that one day erupts into everything, and it bursts open and emerges, and from that point on, everything has been growing and expanding infinitely, but not just expanding infinitely, but also accelerating infinitely. So as if we now have this image of this one small little point that expands infinitely bigger and bigger, faster and faster forever, that is the evolution of consciousness. It's energy. Speed is energy. Growth is energy. It's as things get bigger, they have more surface area, they're able to better respond to their environment, just like the single cell growing. It's like when you look out in outer space, that is all evolving in consciousness. And this is where another point, like some people might start to get lost when I'm going to say like the Earth, for example, is conscious.
Yes.
The Earth is a conscious being that, just like the human is made up of all these different systems, that systems are all made up of individual things. on the earth, we have all these individual set things that are made into all these different species and all these different habitats and ecological systems.
Mhm.
And these ecological systems all are interconnected in order to have a wider consciousness and a growing, expanding consciousness. And as the consciousness of the earth evolves, the consciousness of all the beings on the earth need to evolve with it. But also, as the consciousness of the beings evolve, the earth evolves with them. The consciousness of the earth evolves with them. The solar system is another example. Like the earth is conscious and evolving in consciousness because the solar system is evolving in consciousness and the sun is evolving. So it's all interconnected and it's all growing and evolving together at the same time.
Everything is everything.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. Everything is everything. So I'm gonna come. I don't want to do this for too long because there's so much.
I know.
But I do want to come back to like the David Hawkins map of consciousness and how humans can evolve in our lifetime and over a series of lifetimes. Because it's the same idea. It's our ability to respond to our environment increases as we grow in consciousness,
Mhm.
or I can also say like we grow in awareness,
Mhm.
or we could also say as we bring more life energy or more like chi or more prana, whatever you want to call it, into our essence. And our essence goes beyond our physical body. We're like, it's our aura, it's the geometric shapes that make up our own frequency signature.
Mhm.
Just like I was saying, all the periodic table of elements have their own, like, so every single person has their own frequency. And that frequency is the consciousness that's coming through us and expressing as us. And there's levels to it. So it's like the level that you're at is your ability to, or it's like kind of it's how you see the world, starting at like at the lower point, and we'll definitely break this all down in a later podcast. But it's like at the lower levels, it's like anger and resentment and shame and guilt.
Fear,
Yeah, I think shame is
resentment.
actually the lowest, and then
Yeah,
works up
guilt,
to
yeah,
anger. Then it
guilt.
works up from like anger to pride to courage, and then it starts to get into some of the like love and joy and
Yeah,
some of the higher
yeah.
levels of consciousness and the
And you hit like a
higher.
neutrality is in the
Yeah,
middle point. Yeah.
yeah, so it's these different ways of being where we evolve, where it's like it's the evolution of consciousness for our ego. Basically, it's like how our avatar for this planet is also growing because it's a fractal, in the same sense that everything else that we experience is growing and evolving. And then we come back to water and then wrap this up.
Sure.
So I think water is a really cool example of the way that consciousness can affect something. So just like I was saying about humans, where it's like as we climb this ladder of like the map of consciousness, we see the world different and then we become different. Like you're saying, the way we learn things changes and the way we understand things changes because we have a broader awareness and we're able to take in more information and see things differently and understand things and hold different ideas in mind and not be like so rigid and stuck in one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where water it's H2O, it's hydrogen and it's oxygen. And then depending on how it is being affected by the energy around it and its environment, basically, it completely transforms.
Mm.
So when there's no energy, I said before about light, that darkness is just the absence of light. Cold is the absence of heat. So when water does not have energy flowing into it in the form of heat, it's cold. When water's cold, it freezes, it becomes ice. It's rigid, it's stuck in place, it's unmoving, it's just there.
I know, it's so
Right?
cool. You brought that to my attention. I was like, holy crap, I never
It's a
thought of it.
really, really cool analogy or metaphor for consciousness. And it's like as you start to put more consciousness into that ice, it raises the energy. Energy becomes measured as heat. The heat heats the ice melts, it becomes water. It becomes more fluid, more easily moving. It flows. It can it can maneuver and understand its environment better. It can get around better. It begins to take on the shape of the container that you put it in. It finds its level. Like all these these really cool aspects of water start to become available to it when there's energy. And if you keep on adding energy and keep heating the water, it starts to bubble up a little bit, starts to boil, and then it becomes a mist or a vapor. And that vapor is even more free to react and respond than water is. It floats. It kind of goes in everywhere. It fills space. It like
twirls.
yeah,
It shapes different shapes. And
yeah, so it like becomes like, if you think of like the freedom of water, it comes with heat, because like ice isn't free to do anything, it's just stuck, and then water can flow, and then it can like just, it can be everywhere. It becomes enlightened.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's it. So it's like, that is also the evolution of like people. You think of like the stubborn person who's stuck in their ways, they're not going to change their mind. Then as their consciousness begins to come in and inform it, and they're able to maneuver a little bit and respond to their environment more and flow. And then as they keep going, they become this like real, this like free, just like vapor of a thing that like you can't even always see it. It's just there. It's the clouds. Like you literally like you become the clouds, and that's enlightenment. There you go. I think we did it. Yeah. So I really hope that that was helpful. Like I said, we will go into this in much greater detail, maybe in a few episodes, and break down different aspects of it and how it's relevant. And if you guys have questions, it would be awesome if you reached out and shared them.
Yeah, do that.
And yeah, that's it. That's consciousness.